Coming up next is the Dr. Kim Taylor Show. Here's your chance to talk about what matters to you. Although you'll receive helpful advice from Dr. Kim, remember this is not to be construed as any form of psychotherapy, diagnosis, or treatment, and cannot replace a therapeutic relationship with a mental health professional. You can reach Dr. Kim by calling 564-1290 or 866-564-1290. You can also listen live on the internet at drkimtaylorshow.com. Now, here's Dr. Kim.
I'm Dr. Kim Taylor. Welcome to the program. We're talking about narcissism today. It has become such a popular buzzword, and it's used to explain many different kinds of people, whether it's celebrity or otherwise, but it's those who engage in attention-seeking behavior or these outlandish types of behavior. It was a while back now that I did a show on the effects that narcissistic mothers have on their children, and I certainly touched a nerve out there because that one show received thousands of hits on the podcast, and a number of personal responses came in from the audience. I think that today there's no doubt that there is an epidemic of narcissism. We see it everywhere. It's on the social platforms. We're also inundated with shows on TV and film that celebrate this kind of behavior, where people can never be too outrageous or too self-centered, and we all sit there mesmerized by their behavior, maybe even horrified sometimes, but nonetheless, we're entertained by these types of shows. Narcissism is not just about being confident or even having high self-esteem. It's as if we've taken it to a whole new level unseen in our history. And now it seems that these days, people are not judged on their character or what they have accomplished. Now, people are judged for the amount of attention and fame that they can seek. So that's what we're talking about today. We're going to look more closely into this issue. And with that in mind, I have two authors that are coming on who have written the book, The Narcissism Epidemic, Living in the Age of Entitlement. Twenge and Keith Campbell have chronicled this obsession that we seem to have with ourselves. And they're here to help explain how we got there and what we might need to do if we are ever to be able to get out of this. So if you have a question or if you want to reach me, you can call 805-564-1290 or send me an email. Send it to drkim at drkimtaylorshow.com. So you are not going to want to miss this program because narcissism is affecting all of us, whether it's your friends, family, coworkers, a spouse, a partner, or whether it's just what it is doing to society at large. So stay with me. We need to take a quick break here, but I'll be right back with my guests.
You are listening to Dr. Kim Taylor on KZSB AM 1290.
Welcome back to the program. I'm here with authors Twenge and Keith Campbell, both psychologists, and they have written the book, The Narcissism Epidemic. Welcome to the program.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, let's be clear about the difference between self-esteem and overconfidence versus narcissism, because for the most part, I think people do think that there is not a downside to being confident.
We're talking about self-esteem. It's having a positive attitude about yourself. You think you're a decent human being. Being confident is thinking you have the ability to accomplish things. Where that gets to be a problem with narcissism is that you think you're not just a decent human being, but a really great human being and better than other people, more attractive, more powerful, more important, more special. And your confidence often blurs into overconfidence. So you take big risks, and sometimes you're off, and when you fail, you blame other people and let them clean up the mess. And this is the kind of problem we see with politicians or business leaders or whatever with these sort of the big egos and big problems.
So how do you really explain the rise in narcissism in our society right now? Does the research show that normal narcissism is related to what is happening or what has been happening in our society?
I mean, we think it does. So, first of all, there is some pretty good evidence that narcissism is increasing. So, there's generational shifts in narcissism scores on the standard measure, the Narcissistic Personality Inventory. There have been upswings in lots of other things too. Positive self-view, so thinking you're above average. That's increased among college student samples in from the 1960s compared to more recently. College students are more likely to say they're above average in leadership ability, in their drive to achieve, in their academic ability, even though by objective measures they're not actually any higher in those skills. We, in the book, explored a lot of other things that are correlated with narcissism too. So that plastic surgery rates have gone way up, that the size of houses has increased, that people take on more debt. And there's just all of these manifestations of narcissism around us.
Well, and that's what I'd like to get into is really what are the causes, because you've really talked about this four-legged stool theory and the whole concept of reality versus fantasy. So let's kind of delve into that. The first one you really start talking about in your book is developmental. You talk about parents. Can you tell us more about how parents are contributing more and more to the growth in narcissism or the kind of self-entitlement?
There's a few studies on this. They're not perfect, but they point in the direction of people who score high in narcissism that their parents kind of let them do whatever they wanted. Their parents put them on a pedestal, praised them a lot. And sure enough, when you look at studies on how parenting has changed over time, that's the direction it's changed. Parents are less likely to say now they want their children to obey. They seem to be more likely to favor a couple studies that just came out too recently to be in the book. In fact, they found parenting has become more individualistic, has focused much more on the child as an equal rather than this idea of the child obeying. And it's a mixed bag. There's some good things about that strategy. But when it crosses over into some of the examples we have in the book, say the baby bibs that say, I'm the boss, and princess or prince, or the one for boys that says, sorry, I only date models. I mean, this is for a baby. This type of, narcissistic overinflation, you're getting this at a very young age, and kids are singing the I'm Special song in preschool. Well, I think I'm a special person is one of the items on the narcissism inventory. And you also get that fantasy versus reality showing up very early. So the classic example of that is the trend in the last 10 to 15 years of every child who participates gets a trophy. Well, that's a pretty good manifestation of, well, that's not confidence, that's overconfidence, because in real life you don't get a trophy just for showing up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we see this, there are other things like even just naming practices we've studied. I mean, kids are getting more individualistic names now than they have at any time that we've had census data on this or Social Security data on this. So people are much more individualized and see how they see their kids. And then there's strange phenomena like the children being named Messiah, which is about, about the 400th most popular name. I mean, went from Prince to King and now Messiah. So you see this sort of individuality in how we name our children.
So in some ways, as far as parenting goes, you were talking about very permissive parenting style, as well as this self-esteem that has gone kind of amok here, that we praise too much as parents, that all of the kids are stars and winners, even if their performance doesn't show that.
That is really the big change we've shifted. As a clinical psychologist, I mean, obviously people who have personality disorders or other problems, and, cold and abusive parenting and really negative and harmful parenting is not good. I mean, that can lead to all sorts of problems in adults. So that's not what we're saying is a good idea, but this idea of sort of overpraise, treating your kids like they're in charge of the family rather than the parents seems to be more uniquely related to narcissism.
Mm-hmm. And so the second leg that you talked about was about media culture and the celebrity culture. Can you tell us how that also is kind of building this epidemic of narcissism?
So we use that model of health and kind of narcissism almost as the spread of a disease and an epidemic. We found it kind of worked surprisingly well. And sometimes epidemiologists talk about a certain person being a super spreader, that they give the virus or whatever they have to more people than the average person. Well, celebrities are the super spreaders of narcissism. Often they're the ones who make it seem glamorous, especially reality television. They are the most super of the super spreaders when it comes to narcissism. I mean, those shows really are a showcase of narcissistic people and behaviors. It's actually been proven. Dr. Drew Pinsky had 200 of his celebrity guests fill out the narcissistic personality inventory. And while not a shock, his celebrity guests were higher in narcissism than his control group, although his control group was SC business students, and it's a little shocking anybody's higher in narcissism than them, so my friends who go there have told me. But still, one of the most interesting parts of his study was he looked at which celebrities were the most narcissistic, and it was not the movie stars, it was not the musicians, it was not the stand-up comedians, which is where I would have otherwise put my money, it was the reality TV stars. Which makes sense. Those are the people who are going to like the idea of cameras following them around. They're going to be famous just for being famous. But those are the shows that are supposed to be a slice of someone's life, a slice of reality. And they really promote this idea of narcissism being glamorous, which I think has a big impact, especially on young people.
Mm-hmm. Well, and what I do know for sure is that psychologists who do the testing for the contestants on these reality shows are also looking for those who, put themselves out there, take risks, be entertaining, the ones who have difficulty having interactions with others, because it is going to increase the ratings and more people will then watch. So even though it's kind of like sometimes watching a traffic crash where you can't take your eyes off of it, but you don't want to watch it either, that some of these people are really chosen because they are going to be outrageous.
It makes sense. I mean, narcissists are entertaining. Mm-hmm. They really are. Often in a bad way, but they are very entertaining.
Mm-hmm. And you know, in the old days when people actually wrote scripts, I mean, you take somebody who's a real trained actor, and they could act as if they're self-absorbed or whatever the case is. With reality television, where the script isn't quite as formal, there's just a structure. You need people who have these sort of personality characteristics to make it fun to watch.
Mm-hmm. So really the third leg of this theory about why we have more narcissists is the internet and how people can spend hours just contemplating their own images now. Tell us how that also breeds this kind of culture.
It's the democratization of celebrity. I mean, there's something about that with reality television, but things like the internet, we get to select and present our identities to masses of people, and we all get to do it. And what we find when we study sites like Facebook are that people who are narcissistic have more connections. They seem to function very well in these environments in terms of getting connected, getting linked in. They also propose in more attractive ways. They talk about themselves in more flattering ways. We see, starting to study selfies now, and you see that people who are narcissistic take more selfies and broadcast those to people. So that this internet it's basically like giving the power of TV to every child and frankly everybody in the country, and turned us all into little celebrities for good and for bad.
Mm-hmm. I heard someone whose name I won't mention because it is my first name also, but I heard her talking, which we all know who we're talking about because you can't miss this person. But what I heard her talking about was that how many pictures that she took of herself each day in selfies, and then how wherever she goes that she makes a point of spending at least 5 minutes putting her phone down so that she can be present in the moment she's in.
5 whole minutes?
Yes, but other than that, she's spending most of the time trying to get a really good selfie shot that she can send out.
That's just sad.
Well, but, and for certain people, this is the thing. It works.
I know. And I think that's the problem here is that all of these kids are looking up to them and they are finding that, yes, it does work because these people have money, they have success, they have fame, and they can buy the glamour if they don't have it. And it's so captivating to them, so enticing.
Yeah. Shameless self-promotion is it works. And, Gene and I talk about this and, we kind of conclude you've got to be willing to do it a little bit. That's just what you need to survive nowadays. And lots of people don't like to, but they feel like, I've got to have that as sort of a tool in my toolbox, be able to put myself out there a little bit.
The good news, though, for those of us who want to stay fully human, is that in the long run, narcissism doesn't actually help you succeed. We think it does, seeing some of these reality TV stars and so on, because they're highly visible. But study after study finds you bring them into the lab or studies of CEOs and things like that. The most successful ones are not the ones who are high in narcissism because they alienate other people and they don't get along with others and they take too many risks. And it just doesn't work out very well for them in the long run. So what Keith is saying about the tool in the toolbox is great because that's what it should be. It should be a tool. It should not be your whole life. And when it is, you might have some short-term success, but in the long term, and a lot of people believe that narcissism is the key to success, and they're pretty surprised to learn that it actually, in the long run, can be harmful to success at work and in relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it fires.
As we're talking about the four-legged stool theory, let's just go to the fourth one because you talk about that the fact that it has been so easy to get credit and to therefore have money to spend. It's like the dream for a narcissist because they can have what they want when they want it and they can look good. So tell us a little bit more how all of that in our culture has also made an increase in narcissism.
This idea that anything that sort of can allow you to appear grander than you are is a path. Credit is a great example of this. And I think about it a lot as, it's like the fairy godmother in Cinderella. You get the coach, you get the, and everything's great. You get the footman and everything. You go to the ball, and then at midnight it all goes away. And credit's like that. You can go out and buy a great house. You can buy a great car. I could do it right now. And I could feel great about myself for a short while. And then I'm going to have to pay the bill, and it's going to come back and sort of collapse. And the problem in the system was when everybody's doing that, you look around and go, all these people are living the dream, and I'm not. I better catch up with them.
Mm-hmm.
When we wrote the book, it was before this recession
crash
really cracked in, and the assumption was, well, this thing's going to crash and it's going to get really bad, but they keep printing the money, and both of you are out in California, and you just see it. You just say, wow, this money's still being printed. People are still going crazy. The standards haven't changed. It's amazing that there hasn't been any sort of reset, but it hasn't happened.
Okay. We actually need to take a quick break. I'm here with Jean Twenge and Keith Campbell, both authors and psychologists that have written the book, The Narcissism Epidemic. Welcome to the land of entitlement. We'll be right back after this break.
You are listening to Dr. Kim Taylor on KZSB AM 1290.
If you are just joining us, I'm here with Jean Twenge and Keith Campbell. Their book is The Narcissism Epidemic, and it's been called a very compelling and appalling book about how people are just waking up to the fact that we have created this epidemic of narcissists. So how can the narcissistic epidemic be destructive to our culture and to society?
Narcissism has sometimes been described as a disease that hurts other people. Because it feels pretty good, especially in the short term, to be narcissistic, and you feel good about yourself, you're on top of the world, you're the greatest. But then it can hurt other people pretty badly. Anyone who has dated someone or been married to someone who is highly self-centered has experienced this. Having a parent who's narcissistic, or a child, or even a coworker or a boss, it can be really, really difficult. And then you take it to the societal level, and it can become even more problematic. That if you have a society of people who are much more focused on themselves, and then and we found this through other studies too, less concern for others, they're less interested in getting involved with politics, they have less trust in other people, less confidence in large institutions like the government, but also in science and medicine and schools and everything. All of these things are at an all-time low. People are much less likely to say they have confidence in anything except for themselves, so you can see the expression of narcissism even there. And that is a difficult position for a society to be in when you have people who just basically don't want to work together and don't want to trust each other. That is obviously not a good situation.
Keith, people who are narcissists, they're almost proud of the fact that they are. And so even if you ask them whether they are or not, they seem to, feel fine to own it. And in fact, they seem rather proud of it. So do they see themselves as superior to others? And the fact that they're fine with it, how do we deal with them?
That's a challenge. And what you see in most of the research is people who are narcissistic do have some insight into it in general. They have sort of a moral system that's consistent with that. So, hey, look, what's wrong with looking out for number one? Or, I have to, I've got to take care of me first. That's no one else will. So you do get some awareness. Often people aren't aware of the destructive outcome that's happening in their own lives. So they, somebody will say, gee, my life isn't working. People don't like me. How do I get everybody else to change? And the answer is, well, don't be such an arrogant jerk. There is some difficulty in seeing that if you're really narcissistic.
Mm-hmm.
Usually, when we deal with this, there's a huge amount of people who are damaged by narcissism, and it's very rare for people to say, look, I'm too full of myself. I'm missing out on something. Like, I don't have a strong family relationship I want. I don't have a relationship with my spouse I want. It's hurting me at work. It's sort of derailing my career. When that does happen, and people who are narcissistic do see it, and they do on occasion see the damage it causes, there is a possibility to change. The trick is getting people to see it.
Okay, well, one of the books that you did write is When You Love a Man Who Loves Himself, and how to deal with that one-way type of relationship. Are there any clues about how to spot this or how to work with it? Because it certainly is going to impact the relationship.
I think the challenge with narcissism is not only don't people, they don't wear the T-shirt that says, I'm a narcissist and I'm eventually going to screw up your life, even though it'll be kind of fun to date me in the short term.
Just because you're so charming, right?
Right. They don't say that, but what happens is people are charming and likable and seem real confident, and you get in a relationship, and then it gets bad down the line. So I think the best piece of advice for anything is look at somebody's history. See if there's people who are narcissistic will leave sort of a trail of destruction behind them, sort of this tornado model. And so if you look at their history, look at how they treat other people who they don't want something from, maybe sort of how they treat employees or how they treat, people who work for them or in the service industry. You can get a sense that way, but if you look at them, it's very challenging to see the narcissism right up.
Mm-hmm. Jean, you wrote a book called Generation Me, and why today's young Americans are more confident, assertive, entitled, and more miserable than ever. What are the stats? People that are in their 20s, is it more profound in their 20s as opposed to the general population?
There's a few studies, first of all, looking at the generational difference that hold age constant. So they looked at college students. So that's nice because you can make the argument, well, most people are more narcissistic when they're younger, and then they get less narcissistic as they get older. Interesting thing is not actually any definitive study showing that's true, but it's a good, reasonable guess. But you're going to really look at how it's changed over time and the differences among the generations. What you want to do is take age out of the equation. So when you do that, we do see across, I a nationwide meta-analysis and then 2 analyses within college campuses, that there is an increase in narcissistic traits. And how big is that change? Well, in one of the studies, we looked at the percentage of students who answered the majority of the questions in the narcissistic direction on the questionnaire. And back in the early 80s, it was about 18%. And in the last data we have is from 2009, when it was 30%. So another study looked at NPD, the narcissistic personality disorder, the clinical form of narcissism that's much more severe. And it found that if you describe the symptoms to folks and then they decide if it fits the definition, and you ask them, in your whole lifetime, have you ever experienced these? You get an interesting pattern. Usually in studies like that, you're going to get a much higher number among people who are older because they've had more years to develop symptoms or have these experiences. But the numbers were actually flipped. Only about 3% of people over 60 had experience with NPD in their lives. And almost 10% of those in their 20s had already had that experience. So that also suggests a strong generational trend toward more narcissism.
And is it true that this has really hit girls more than it has guys?
Well, we did find that in one study, but it's not completely definitive. If you look at the cultural indicators, they seem to point in that direction. So a lot of the emphasis on kind of over-the-top vanity and plastic surgery, some of the reality TV stars, those have had a bigger impact on girls and women.
Yeah, but I think that, like Gene's saying, the data I don't think it's rock solid on that.
No, it's definitely not. That was something we found once and not again. So the jury's still out on that one.
Yeah.
I think what we are seeing is this narcissism. Has it become the new norm? Is that really where we're at, that it's really the new norm?
It's funny because the whole culture hasn't gone off the deep end in any ways. But if you look at the idea of, for example, a selfie, literally taking a picture of yourself and sending it to your friends, that's pretty strange. And it's incredibly common. I mean, artists did it a long time ago. Occasionally, families did it with a time picture. But, sort of behaviors like that are really strange. And they become very normal. So my kids do it, and I'm like, totally normal. If my grandmother was alive and saw that, she would have just blown her stack. She would have, what are you guys doing? So I think there have been some pretty significant changes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think I was just talking to my mom this morning, and we were talking about the drastic changes that have happened just from the time that I've grown up until now. And that, yes, my great-grandmother, my grandparents, even my parents are somewhat horrified by what they see on TV these days and what they see people doing. So yes, we are kind of... we love to watch it, but sometimes we watch with half an eye open.
It's always a funny thing, thinking about our perceptions of culture as we grow older, because there's always the possibility that as you get older, I don't know, maybe your perceptions are going to shift. You may look at things that, say, maybe you were doing when you were 18, but then at 45, you're going to be more judgmental of them. So it's one of the things that we really try hard to do in our research is to try not to rely too much on those perceptions, and as much as we can, get hard data, preferably hard data over time. And the great thing is the technology now, it allows us to look at culture in that way. So, for example, the Google Books database, Google scanned in the full text of 5 million books. And they have this thing called the Ngram Viewer, and you can look at the language use in books for any word or any phrase up to 5 words, all the way back to the 1800s. So Keith and I published 3 papers doing that. For example, we looked at pronouns. Turns out, as you might expect, with increasingly narcissistic culture, the language use in books has shifted too. Words like I, me, and mine have become more common, Words like we and us have become a little less common. And the biggest change is a quadrupling in the use of second person, of you, which is the reader participating in the discussion with the author, and that focus on the self again of kind of the self-help language of your best life. And that has some advantages, obviously, but it does really capture that shift in the culture toward the individual.
Yeah, and I think on the more positive side, the part of the risk in talking about this stuff is you turn into the angry guy, like, get off my lawn, kids,
Mm-hmm.
and that's always the concern, and so I think it's important to point out some positive things, like young people today they're less violent. School violence has gone, school shootings have gone up, but other than that, the general level of violence is low, premarital, or pregnancy before marriage, or unmarried moms has gone down. So there's some positive cultural changes too. It's not that everybody's turned into a savage by any means.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also the huge upside of more equality and more tolerance. This is the most tolerant, least prejudiced generation ever. They take equality virtually for granted, on the basis of, say, race and gender and sexual orientation, and increasingly transgender status too. For them, it's just, people are different. That's cool. And that's a really big, good strength of our culture now and of this young generation.
Yeah.
So we've been talking a lot about the environmental factors that, bring this on. Are there any genetic components?
Narcissism, like almost everything in personality, is about 50% traced to some sort of heritability, some sort of gene involvement. So there's certainly there. But in terms of the change over time, there's no real evidence to suggest there's been some sort of genetic change that would account for this. So I think at the individual level, genetics matter a lot. But as a culture, I don't think there's been a change that would really suggest there's some biological basis for this, or genetic basis at least.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. I'm here with Jean Twenge and Keith Campbell, and we're talking about the narcissism epidemic. We'll be right back after the break.
You are listening to Dr. Kim Taylor on KZSB AM 1290.
My guests for the hour are authors of The Narcissism Epidemic, Jean Twenge and Keith Campbell. You talk about all of this, and you have described narcissism, and you've described it as really the fast food for the soul, that it tastes great in the short term but has negative consequences for the long run. Are there things that we need to do on a personal level or within our culture to kind of change what is happening?
Yes, I think so. I now think of these as CPR, just because I can remember it. But the first is this idea of compassion or connection. When you care about people, when you're connected to people, a lot of the narcissism goes in the show, and it can be in a very helpful way. So anything we can do to get people to connect or have empathy for others helps. The second thing people don't think about much, but really helps, teaching something for the joy of doing it. The narcissism drops, and it becomes about the experience and not so much about showing off the experience. So you go down to your beach in Santa Barbara, and you'll see all these guys taking pictures of themselves with GoPro cams, and sort of that seems to be in a way counterproductive, especially when they're taking selfies in the waves. If you let go of yourself and really get into things, the narcissism can drop. And then there's this bigger, issue of responsibility taking, where part of narcissism is, whenever there's a problem, you blame everybody else, but whenever there's a spotlight or credit, you jump into it. And if you can train yourself and expect your children or your friends or your loved ones to take responsibility for what they do, both good and bad, that can be a really powerful buffer to narcissism, and also taking responsibility makes you feel like you have a lot more control in your life, and it can be a very positive thing. And finally, it's part of related to responsibility, this idea of natural consequences. And, in life, you can BS a lot of people, but when you're, dealing with nature, when you're, dealing with real performance, you fail, and it's really good to fail. And if that's something you can do yourself or let your children do, I think that can be a good buffer to sort of an inflated ego. So anyway, that's my very quick response to that question.
Okay. Jean, do you have some thoughts about that too?
Yeah, I like the CPR thing, Keith. That's awesome. I got to remember that. I give a lot of talks to undergraduates, both my own students, and I've visited a number of campuses over the years. I'm talking about generational differences, and been kind of surprised that they haven't really questioned the idea of their generation being more narcissistic. They kind of accept that. They're like, yeah, we know. What's for dinner? Let's take a selfie. But their answer is almost always this. They say, yes, but we have to be this way because the world is so competitive now. And then when I mentioned the research suggesting that, especially in the long run, narcissism doesn't actually help you succeed, and that even self-esteem isn't particularly helpful for success, that's when we have an interesting conversation, because I basically told them that the world is a square, that it kind of blows their minds. So I always come back to that as we're going to start with one thing to tell our kids, to tell young people that, being self-centered is actually not particularly helpful in life, that instead developing those skills of empathy and perspective taking and being able to have, some people call those soft skills, that's tough. It's hard to take somebody else's perspective, but it is one of the best skills you can possibly develop. And not only is it the right thing to do in terms of having that empathy for other people, that's actually one of the things that does, in the end, help people succeed in relationships, certainly, but at work as well. Being able to understand where somebody else is coming from is an extremely useful skill. It's one that narcissists have a hard time with. And it kind of captures one of those traits that tends not to be particularly highly valued in our culture and emphasized as much as it should be, but that's really key.
There's also a lot of pressure to self-promote and to keep up with everything that's going on out there. And I know that my office is, filled with people who come in that they're more unhappy than ever as they search the Facebook or the Instagram or the Twitter or the Pinterest, and they look at all what they see as these great lives with people doing all these great things, and they compare it to what they're doing. And it just doesn't hit the real factor, but they can't let go of the fact that they think, because it's out there, that it is real for those people, but it's not real for them. So what would you say about how to use these platforms, but to use them more in a productive way?
That, I think, is a really fascinating question. I mean, I've been talking to people about doing work on that, but you can imagine ways you could do that. Like you could imagine using Instagram to show pictures about things you're grateful for, or to show, to focus more on using these sites to encourage your friendship with others rather than showing off how great your life is and how bad everybody else's is. You could use this to sort of promote friendship or show vulnerability or other ways. So I think the tools, like any tool, can be used for positive or negative outcomes. I think we sort of naturally gravitated to narcissism first. I mean, there's some of the great colonizers of attention seeking, but others can use it too.
Okay, well, we have just a short time here, so I'm going to ask both of you this. What is your advice to your own family or children about what's going on out there? What are the last words that you would say to them?
I tell my kids all the time about one of Keith's points about taking responsibility. Do not blame other people for problems that you created. They know I'm really strict on that. And then in general, what I tell parents, and I try to hold to this myself, don't tell your kid you're special, you're the most special princess, and with the idea that it'll build their self-esteem. That's narcissism. It's not self-esteem. Say what you mean, which is I love you. It's a much better message. It's not, not only is it what you mean, but it's a better thing for the child to hear, and it creates connection instead of emphasizing uniqueness and narcissism.
Okay, great. And Keith, we have about 30 seconds here.
I agree with what Jean said completely. I also, the point I try to make is things get stronger when they face stress or resistance, as long as it's not trauma. So, you you put a tree in the wind, it's going to be stronger than one without wind. If your immune system develops when you get exposed to bugs, not when you grow up in a bubble. And I think if kids can face these age-appropriate challenges on their own, they'll build this healthy self-confidence, this healthy sense of efficacy to be able to do things and not have to fantasize about how great they are, but actually accomplish something reasonable and contribute to the world. That's what I hope.
Okay. Jean Twenge and Keith Campbell, thank you so much for coming on my program. It has really been great to talk with you, and I really like your book. You can reach both of them by going to my website at drkimtaylorshow.com. Search under the guest contacts, and all of their contact info will be there. Plus, of course, their book, The Narcissism Epidemic. It's I'm sure you can purchase it through Amazon or any of the other bookstore sites. I'll be right back with my closing.
You are listening to Dr. Kim Taylor on KZSB AM 1290.
Thank you for joining me. I really hope that you spend some time focusing on what is real for you and truly meaningful in your life, and that you share that with your friends, your family, and your children. I really welcome your comments and questions. You can email me at drkim@drkimtaylorshow.com. And if you want to listen to any past shows, you can find them now as podcasts on iTunes. Check it out under The Dr. Kim Taylor Show. So I want to thank you for being here, and I hope you join me again next Thursday, live at 5. This is your time to either sit and listen or take the time to call in and ask your question so that you can get some help. I really encourage you to make some notes, and whatever it is you'd like to talk about, I'll be back here live at 5 next Thursday. I'm Dr. Kim, and remember, nobody else has to change in order for you to get better.